You mentioned before that flex picking in pro play is a huge issue. Can you further explain why flex picking is such a problem in pro play drafts? In pro play, draft is a big part of the game. And so things that give you a draft advantage are valuable. Here's a draft advantage. Faker is god tier at Ryze and no one else can play Ryze. And so whenever you're against SKT, you have to ban Ryze. That's a draft advantage because now your team has one ban they have to waste on Faker as opposed to like banning other powerful characters. Another draft advantage is first pick, get the best character. Another draft advantage is last pick because you can counter pick someone, right? So there's a number of draft advantages that can help you get champions that are gonna be better off for whatever reason. The reason a flex pick is so powerful in pro play as a draft advantage is because you can pick it early and then not necessarily commit it to anything. And that has a few effects. Number one is it causes uncertainty for your opponents. And so they'll be like, okay, well, we don't know where this character is going, which means you're less able to flex pick. You're less able to counter them. So if Viego's only a jungler and you see them lock him in, you could potentially pick a jungler that counters Viego. The second, Viego is a jungler and a mid laner and they lock him in, you no longer know where he's going. And so you can't necessarily then lock in something to play against him. And so by being a flex pick, picking that character earlier in the draft, then creates a situation where your opponent can't pick against them. And that's a big deal. Flex picks also then enable other characters on your team, where you could say, pick Viego, again, mid and jungle, and then you can basically say, and then last pick, if this OP mid laner who has some really big counters isn't picked, we'll pick it if they have no counters. I'm making a character up. Let's say, as an example, Vex is OP, but not if they pick Yasuo. Again, imaginary situation, making this up. And so what you do is you lock in Viego, and you basically say, assuming Viego is a flex pick, you basically say, if they pick Yasuo, we'll run Viego mid. If they don't pick Yasuo, we'll run Viego jungle and lock in that Vex, who's OP unless Yasuo is there. Again, hypothetical characters, but it's just the idea of by taking that flex pick, you've created versatility in many other parts of your drafting phase. And so what we've seen as a result when characters are powerful pro flex picks is a situation where we'll nerf a character to be legitimately really bad in all of their lanes, and they'll still be picked in pro. Because despite the fact that they're bad everywhere, the draft advantage that their flex picking offers makes up for it. And so we've had metas where Viego would legitimately be weak in mid and jungle, but because he was a flex pick, he would still be super strong for pros. And Viego is actually a bad example, even as I say it. Better examples of, we've had metas where Kiana was bad everywhere, but she was a flex pick, so she was actually still really, really high prio in pro. Silas was weak everywhere, but he was a flex pick, so he was still really, really, really high prio in pro. And so it creates a really bad balance situation for the champion, where they have to be even weaker than they normally would be because they're flex picked in pro play. Whereas if they weren't flex picked, you might not have seen them picked at all. And so that is the challenge and the danger of pro play flex picking is the TLDR is it's a draft advantage, and it's it's in such a way that we often will have to nerf the character beyond to be very, very, very weak, more weak than they would normally have to be if they weren't a flex pick. And so that's often why when you see a character that's a very high prio flex pick in pro, one of the things we'll try to do to them is make one of their roles a lot less viable at the highest level. The lifesteal ratio is fake. You don't scale well enough to drain tank with it. Yeah. The lifesteal ratio here is definitely not good. You should not build lifesteal on AMBESSA because if you have any expectation of healing a lot, it's not that powerful. But again, if you're a Bloodthirster enjoyer or a Hydra enjoyer, there is, some nominal scaling here if you want to get those items. Why isn't your alt passive heal called Omnivamp? Because for starters, it's not Omnivamp because it doesn't work on attacks. And then on top of that, it's not Spell Vamp because it works full effectiveness on her AoE spells versus champions. And so basically, it is Spell Vamp that works full effectiveness versus champions effectively, and low effectiveness versus minions and whatnot. How about a champ that can with a skill shot that can be drawn in a custom pattern with a mouse. It's going to be Victor's reworked laser. So the thing about a custom pattern with a mouse, there's two things that are a problem with that. We've tried that before, by the way. One is players are just going to draw phallic objects, but obviously that's not a big deal. The actual thing is that in League of Legends, a lot of shapes are completely useless and uninteresting. When you think about a character that can draw a custom pattern, you might think, oh, there's all these cool things they could do, right? But the end result of a lot of custom patterns is it is a line that it goes forward or backwards, or it is a circle. Because like in League of Legends, those are like the actual shapes with power. It's either going from point A to point B, or it is defining an area that is a circle. Like if you compare a circle to a star, a circle is just a better star in terms of the area it covers. If you compare a circle to a square, like a diamond, it's like the same thing. If you compare, and so it's usually like you're drawing a rectangle or a circle, and a lot of the other shapes that you could draw aren't going to necessarily have a lot of interest to them in terms of gameplay effects. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be cool or fun, but mainly it's like the way it would express itself, and a lot of times is the player is, you know, circling you or drawing a line to you. Will there ever be a point of too many champs in the game and maybe increasing how many champs you can ban in draft? I mean, obviously I design champions, so I have my own feelings on it, but I don't think I think there's always new ideas for characters. There's always new themes and stuff you can do that are compelling. And so I don't really think the idea of too many champions really holds, especially when you already have 160. There's just always new stuff you can do. The argument for too many champions from a learning perspective, I think, is fairly compelling. This is kind of the idea that how are you supposed to learn a game with 160 champions in it? But the hard part about that is I think we crossed that line over a decade ago. I don't think a game with 160 champions is significantly harder to learn, as an example, than a game with 120 champions in it. And so it's if you want a constrained roster where the game is really easy to learn, I think you're supposed to be very, very precious with the characters you put in, and that needs to happen really, really early on. And so I think you get to the point where a game has so many characters. In terms of learnability, what's actually really, really important is that you make things clear. And so this is an idea that if a skill shot is going to hit you and root you, you probably need to make sure it's pretty obvious as to what it's doing visually, even before a person knows what it does. And so there's things you can do with shape language and stuff like that that make things clearer as to what they're going to do to you. And I think that's maybe the thing you want to think about.